Hey friends, it's Len here from 1A Auto. Today in the studio I have a second generation Subaru Forester. This falls within the year ranges of 2003 to 2008. With that said, let's get into the top problems. Now for our first problem, we're going to talk about Takata airbags. Takata airbags are going to be found in a lot of passenger vehicles nowadays. Unfortunately, they have a major recall. Over 100 million vehicles overall have been recalled, so that's something that you're going to want to pay attention to. Now, what can go wrong with these Takata airbags? Well, overall, it's because of the inflator that actually goes bad in general. Inside of that, there's going to be a chemical called ammonium nitrate, and essentially it's very susceptible, especially if there's like a fluctuation in temperature from hot to cold that's fairly frequent, or even in humid climates. For me personally, it's very humid where I live. We have a lot of moisture in the air, so I know for sure I could potentially have a serious issue with my airbags. Now, if the ammonium nitrate inflator for your airbag was contaminated or for some reason just wasn't functioning properly, you can imagine what might happen. If for some reason you were in an incident where the airbag needed to go off, it's essentially supposed to make a nice cushy pillow for you, so in case you had to slam your head forward, it's going to make it so you're protected and you're not going to get hurt. Well, if you could imagine something went wrong with that ammonium nitrate that's inside there, and for some reason it just had a little extra pressure, all that pressure that's inside there could potentially make it so the airbag ends up popping or breaking apart, and in extreme cases, it could create enough pressure to even fragment some of the metal that's inside your steering wheel here, and it could potentially just send a whole bunch of fragments all over the car, which would be no good overall. Obviously, having your airbags so you're going to be safe is important. Having airbags that are going to make you safe and function properly, and you know that they're going to work properly, is even more important. So go ahead and head down to the dealership and make sure you take care of the recall that's on these airbags. Now for our second problem, we're going to talk about excessive oil consumption. Now it's super common, especially on most modern day vehicles, you're going to end up finding that you have oil consumption. Pretty much every vehicle has it. It's just what happens. A tiny bit of oil is always going to get burnt up inside your engine. Unfortunately, on Subaru engines, especially the 4-cylinders, it's going to be very common to have excessive oil consumption. People might consider excessive to be maybe you have to add a quart every oil change or even a quart and a half. In extreme cases, you might even find that you have to add a quart every 1,000 miles, in which case that is excessive. Why might you have that much oil consumption though in general? Generally it comes down to the seals. Now inside this vehicle there's going to be some pretty tight tolerances. Now Subaru needed to make their vehicles a little bit more fuel economical. It's super important these days. Everybody wants to go a little further with a little less gas. It only makes sense. Now to be able to do that, what they had to do was try to loosen up those clearances on the engine a little bit. So by doing that, they kind of created a little bit more area for oil to be able to sneak on by, those piston rings in general, and then get burnt up inside of the engine's combustion chamber. So when that happens, you're probably going to find that you have a little bit of blue or even gray smoke coming out the tailpipe. Now, like I said, some people might have different determinations on what they might consider to be excessive oil burning. Overall, Subaru has its own test for this. What they would essentially do is just go ahead and do an oil change on this with a proper amount of a manufacturer specified oil. They're going to have you drive approximately 1,000 miles to even 1,200 miles, not too much further than that. After that, they're going to bring it right back in, and essentially they're going to drain that oil, and they want to measure exactly how much oil is inside the engine. That way they can determine exactly how much oil you're burning up inside this engine, so they can decide on whether or not they need to start replacing some internal parts for you. Other than that, if you didn't want to go through that whole hassle, maybe it might have cost you a couple extra bucks that you don't happen to have, theoretically all you might have to do is just make sure that you get underneath your hood and you check your oil level once in a while. It really doesn't hurt. You can just come right over here. There's a nice dipstick. As long as you're on a flat level surface with the engine off, you can come right out here and you can check that oil level. Now obviously it's probably a good idea to just keep an extra quart or maybe even 2 quarts of oil inside your trunk if you have the space. Obviously I don't want you to do anything that you feel is unsafe. If you don't like transporting chemicals, that's not necessarily something that I would recommend for you, but it's not flammable or anything that you necessarily have to worry about. It's just kind of like preventative maintenance, just to come in here and check your oil level once in a while. It is your engine after all. Just one quick note on this, when you're adding oil, you only want to go up to that maximum line. You don't want to just go ahead and add a full quart if you only need a half a quart. Believe it or not, you could potentially cause some serious damage to your engine by adding too much oil. Now for our third problem, we're going to talk about head gaskets. Now on these 4-cylinder engines, it's going to be super common for you to have head gasket issues. You're going to have head gaskets on both sides of your engine because this is a boxer engine. So essentially you're going to have some on the driver's side and you're going to have another head gasket over on the passenger side. Now, what can happen with these head gaskets is essentially they end up breaking down internally. So essentially the areas that are supposed to have oil in them or even coolant in them can potentially mix in between each other if the gasket's bad. How are you going to be able to tell if you have an issue with your head gasket though? Well, overall, by looking at your engine, you can kind of look down inside here and you can look to see if you see a little bit of oil along the sides of the engine. That's going to be one way of telling. Now on this one in particular, I can see a little bit of moisture down inside this area here, but overall you're probably going to have a little bit better luck looking from underneath. So just go ahead and climb underneath there, see if it looks like you have an oil leak. Now when you're looking for this, of course you have the valve covers that are located the farthest out and away from the engine. Moving in a little bit, that's where the heads are going to be. But the head gasket is actually in between the head and the block of the engine, which is the main aspect of the engine there. So like I said, if that gasket goes bad, you could potentially be mixing oils or even anything else that's on the inside of the engine there, and you could potentially have some running conditions. Generally, other than looking for leaks, what you could potentially do is, of course, check all your fluids under here. If you find that your engine oil is low, it's super common, like I said before, to be burning a little bit of oil, but overall, you want to make sure that you're checking it. Other than that, your coolant as well. If the coolant looks low and you don't see that you have any leaks, it could potentially be burning it up inside that engine combustion chamber. So if you go out back to the tailpipe there, you run the vehicle for a little bit, it's nice and warm, but you still see smoke coming out the tailpipe, you might have an issue. If you find that you have blue or even dark gray smoke, generally that means that you have an engine oil leak. It's kind of burning up inside the engine combustion chamber there and it's getting shot right out the tailpipe. Other than that, if you find that you have white smoke inside there, that essentially means that you have coolant getting dumped inside the combustion chambers, and once again, that's getting burnt up and shot out the tailpipe. Either way, neither of it's any good for the environment, and it's no good for your engine either. So if you have that issue, that's something that you're definitely going to want to fix ASAP. So now we need to talk about fixes, and I know you want me to say that it's going to be quick, it's going to be easy, and it doesn't cost a lot. Unfortunately, I can't say any of that. It's going to cost a little bit. You're going to have to take apart the whole entire top of your engine and, of course, a lot of the sides to be able to get to this point. It's going to be a little difficult because to do all this, you're going to have to take this engine, you're going to have to pop it right up and out of the car here so that you're going to have access to everything you need to work on. So, of course, that's going to be a little timely. It can be a little bit difficult, especially if you're having to do it in the driveway. Now, aside from that, there's going to be other things that you have to think about along the way. You're going to have a lot of this engine apart, so you're going to need things other than the head gasket. There's going to be a timing belt inside here. That timing belt's going to have a tensioner. You're also going to have a water pump that really only makes sense to replace at the same time, and of course a thermostat. If you're replacing all that, of course you're going to have to drain the coolant, so you're going to need some coolant, and there are some other things along the lines that you're going to need to replace as well. I just kind of want to throw it out there so you know it's not necessarily something that I want to be doing in the driveway, but if I do, you need to make sure that you do as much research on it as possible so you know exactly what to expect. For our fourth problem, we're going to talk about a fuel tank one-way valve. Inside of this fuel tank, it's going to have a little reservoir area, and inside that reservoir area, it's supposed to hold approximately 1.5 gallons of fuel. Essentially, it's just so once that light turns on your dash, you have a little bit of time so you can get to your local filling station. Unfortunately, a lot of times people like to drive on that light for a short while. It happens, I've done it, we've all probably done it. When you do that though, you're always at risk of draining that reserve a little bit low. Essentially, there's supposed to be a valve that's inside the fuel tank that lets fuel slosh around inside there, but essentially what it's going to do is it's going to take it from inside the fuel tank and kind of move it into that reservoir area there, give you a little bit more fuel to get to that local fueling station. Now that valve right there is what this problem is about. The valve itself can go bad internally and it can get stuck, in which case it's not going to allow fuel to flow like it's supposed to, and it's not going to allow fuel to get into that reservoir, and you might end up having an issue when you're trying to drive. You think that the fuel light's on for a little bit, you got some time, but really apparently you don't. You might also notice when you're driving it, you've got a little bit of spitting and sputtering or even like a misfire coming from the engine. If that was to happen, it could potentially be because your fuel's a little bit low or even because that valve's bad. Now the valve for this is easily fixable. Generally all you have to do is just access it through the top of the fuel tank there. We're going to go ahead and take out that fuel pump inside there, and at the bottom of the fuel tank you're going to be able to find a little valve. Now this is generally between like the years 2005 and 2008 models, so it's kind of up there in the model range, but it is something that you're going to want to think about. For the valve itself, you just carefully reach down inside there. Of course, you want the fuel to be as low as possible because you don't want to get it on any of your skin. Go ahead and grab onto that valve, twist it, pop it right out of there. Do you need to replace it? Apparently you don't. I looked it up and there isn't actually a replacement for it. It's pretty much just a removal process. So once you get that valve out of there, the fuel can flow around like it needs to. It's going to get into that little reservoir area inside the fuel tank and you should be good to go. Now it's going to be time to move along to talking about our fifth problem. Now this one comes down to rust or even rot, and this is going to be super common on the front of these vehicles. On the front of the vehicle for the suspension, you're going to have a lower control arm. That's this area right here. The areas that's common to rot out is generally along this forward bracket area. You can see that this one has a lot of rust on it, and that's generally because moisture and everything can make its way into areas, and then it for some reason doesn't make its way out. Of course, having a whole bunch of road salt on the roads doesn't help at all, but that's just something that we want to mention. Now, generally, if you see rot down along this area here, you're also going to find it up along the top area too. So you can't just stop here. And generally, you want to have a little pick, and you're going to try to give this a couple loving bonks, and you just want to see if anything's loose or breaks free. Now, this one doesn't really feel too bad. Of course, I'm just using a soft finger here. If I had a little metal pick or a hammer of some sort, I can give it some more bonks. But things that you want to pay attention to might be something that looks a little bit more like this. This right here is a rot hole. This is very bad. Obviously, I can pretty much press this right through with my finger. So that's something that you want to take care of. This is super unsafe for driving down the road. You can imagine with the weight of the vehicle on it, you're driving down the road, you hit a couple good bumps, this could potentially fold on you, and then in that case, you might potentially even get into an accident, and nobody wants that. So this is something that you definitely want to pay attention to. You want to check both of those control arms especially, and of course the subframe. Super important. So if you confirm that your control arm itself is rotted out, maybe along this bracket area, top or bottom, like I said, typically that's a fairly easy fix. You'd want to just replace the control arm itself, and that's fairly simple because you have a ball joint nut here, a sway bar link, and aside from that, you're going to have a couple of bolts that hold it in. When you do a control arm, you're going to want to make sure that you get a four-wheel alignment. It's super important. Aside from that, if you do have rot on the subframe, like this one right here, this is something that might be a little bit harder to replace. Of course, it's going to bolt on in different areas, and it's a much larger part. This might not be something that you generally want to tackle in the driveway, but it's completely up to you. And since we know you love a whole bunch of information, I'm going to keep you here for just one more. I've got a bonus for you. On pretty much every Subaru, you're going to have a whole bunch of heat shields on these. And what happens on the heat shields? You get this horrible rattling noise while you're driving down the road. You might also hear it when you hit a bump, or even when you're sitting still with the car idling. The engine, of course, is going to vibrate around a little bit, and you're going to be able to hear this. Generally, to fix something like this, you're just going to want to inspect everything, see if there's any rotted or broken hardware, and replace it as needed. But you definitely don't want to just go ahead and remove it and leave it without any shields. Okay, friends, that's pretty much what I've got for you for the second generation Subaru Forester. Maybe you've got one of these cars with problems of your own and you want to talk about it. If you do, leave it in the comments section below because we always love to hear from you. If you liked the video or loved the video or even found it helpful, go ahead and smash on that like button for me. It would mean the world. While you're at it, subscribe, ring the bell, and of course share it with all of your friends. Thanks for watching.